Okay, so we're on day 3 of our webinars to try and support the community in what's quite a challenging time. I'm delighted today to have Professor Patrick McGorry, former Australian of the Year and a neighbour of mine, albeit we're talking to each other in quite unusual circumstances via video call today. Pat, thanks a million for coming on. I know it's just been an extraordinarily busy time for you, which I actually think is a really positive thing, because it means that people are actually putting some focus on mental health. Yes, there are economic issues, but it's a medical emergency, public health crisis, and there will be mental health inputs on it. So how have the last few days been for you?
Well, it's been flat out, Barry. I've been on Zoom almost constantly, actually, because we're switching everything in mental health to, I suppose, digital and much less face to face, obviously for obvious reasons. But it's one thing to say is that you kind of separated the economic and the mental health just now. Actually, an economic downturn is a massive threat to people's mental health. And we always see, huge increased needs of mental health care if there are economic consequences. So the two things are very intimately related. But I suppose the main concern at the moment is the level of anxiety and fear in the community, which is really contributing to a lot of stress for people.
Yeah, look, I gave you a little bit of a heads up in terms of some of the questions that were being put forward to us in advance. And for anyone who's on the webinar, there is a Q&A function down the bottom of your screen that you can use to type in some questions. We will ask those questions anonymously, so please don't feel uncomfortable about putting them through as and when. But look, I guess the way that people are working has changed very quickly and markedly. We had a very difficult day yesterday trying to identify those who could get some places on flights to get back to Ireland. So one of the themes that's coming through is that sort of separation anxiety from loved ones overseas, or even in a country the size of Australia, interstate.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's a great point to bring up, because, as you know, I've got a son in London at the moment, and he can't get back, and he's really stuck, and we're worried about him. He's worried about us, and even my kids that live in Melbourne. It's very, very, very stressful time for everybody, and this is realistic stress. This is not irrational fears. This is not, some forms of mental ill health and mental illness are sort of treatable because we can help people to think differently about the situation. But here, the situation is real, and we are going to have to adapt, and we need to support each other. We need to tap into professional help when that's needed, and we need to hang on to a sense of hope and resilience, I guess, that we're going to get through it, because it is a massive crisis. It's a global crisis, but the world has been through times like this before, and it's always come out the other side in the end. And maybe there will be a lot of casualties, but if we stick together, we've got the best chance of getting through it.
Yeah, look, we've been getting calls from business owners who are members of the chamber, and I think on one side they've got the fear of the unknown, they've got worries about personal safety, community safety, they've got worries about their business. The full spectrum of challenges are coming through. How would you suggest that we can build some resilience? How do we best look out for each other? What should be the response when people don't seem okay in conversations with us?
Yeah. I suppose what are the sort of things we're going to have to deal with? I guess if people are feeling extremely anxious, there are techniques you can learn to just reduce that level of acute stress and anxiety. You know, breathing techniques and mindfulness and those sorts of things. I actually think they're going to be insufficient, you know, on their own in the present crisis. So I would have thought practical things like exercise, sleep, you know, the basics, just making sure that you're in as good a shape as you can possibly be. Social connection, even though we might be physically separated from people, maintaining the one-to-one connections with people that can really, you know, we can exchange mutual support. It's not exactly rocket science, all of that sort of stuff. I think young people are particularly, you know, at risk, but on the other hand, young people are very ingenious about coming up with, you know, creative and agile solutions to things too. So, you know, I've been asked already in the last few days, what should parents be telling young people? I would say, let's listen to the young people sometimes, and they might actually come and tell us what we should be doing. So we've certainly had that experience in developing health services for young people, that they come up with much better solutions that we could have had in the first place. So I think listening to each other, learning from each other, and you know, the human race is a very, you know, impressive you know, organization, isn't it? I mean, we're very, very good at coming up with flexible solutions. I've even seen in my own workplace how our mental health staff at Origin and Headspace have actually adapted incredibly well to the new world, you know, very, very quickly. In fact, they under pressure, under a crisis, they've actually been a lot better than they are under normal conditions, when they're often a bit institutionalized and a little bit, you know, in a pattern. So I think sometimes a crisis brings out the best in people.
Yeah, look, we've been seeing that. I wrote a message to our member base last week where it was just hugely impressive how people were walking the talk. You know, they were putting their hand up to be involved in these webinars, to share knowledge, to share experiences and whatever. And you know, it's multifaceted, and that's been great. But we ran a session yesterday around business protection, elements of which were around having to right size businesses, you know, which can involve some difficult conversations with, you know, landlords, suppliers, but most of all the human side of it. The business owners getting anxious about having to lay people off, and you know, that can be quite confronting. What tips would you put forward in terms of tackling those difficult conversations?
Yeah, yes, I haven't always been in that sort of situation myself, but I think, just off the top of my head, I would have thought that's really a management skill, isn't it, John, that you're talking about, and under difficult circumstances. And I suppose honesty is always good, isn't it? Honesty is always being upfront with people, and I suppose doing the best we can, you know, in terms of kindness and tolerance and patience, and those are real virtues when you're under pressure. The old grace under fire sort of you know, advice, you know. So if you've got to do something difficult, at least do it in the best possible way. And you know, I think most people do try to do that. And you know, I think yeah, just try to make a conscious effort to make your behaviour the best possible behaviour you can actually deliver under the pressure. But look, I would have thought some of the people on the call would have some, you know, better ideas and good advice about those sort of issues, including yourself, Barry. You know, I mean, you know, you're experienced managers and business people, but I know this is a unique situation, but there'd be similar situations that people have been through before they could draw on. Yeah, and that's probably a more general thing to say, that you know, we've all experienced challenges in our life. What sort of things have worked for us when we've been under the pump, you know, in earlier periods of crisis or stress, and try to draw on those and try to strengthen them in the current climate.
Okay. There seems to be, based on just some of the questions that have been coming in to me, limited understanding of how and where to find support. You know, I think in recent years, it has become more okay to ask people if they are okay. But it is certainly an area that many of us have yet to have to seek that information and put it into practice. Where should we be looking for that advice?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of advice, now appearing, through the internet. That's one of the great things about the modern era, that there's no shortage of information and access to other people, thanks to all the, like what we're doing now. I mean, we couldn't have done this in the 1960s, could we? So I think the usual websites, probably Beyond Blue. Origin has information for young people how to cope in the current, viral crisis with COVID-19. We've got a new set of advice for the young people. Probably the other more general websites for mental health, like Beyond Blue, and Are You Okay? That they would be good places to go as well. And a lot of it would be, as I say, not rocket science, but it might actually spell it out a bit more clearly for people, so they're getting a clear picture. And then I think, if people reflect on their own strength and experience, like I was saying before, what's worked for you in the past, that's something that's we can actually draw on our own reserves there too.
We just had a question come through around what happens around us when a partner is maybe at risk of losing a job, and it's bringing financial stress into the relationship, into the family. Another element to it. Again, it's one where keeping the lines of communication open would be my normal sort of default position. But is there anything different that we should be doing as well?
Well, I think financial stress, I'm glad you brought that up, because, just looking at the queues outside Centrelink, it's getting that is a very, very big source of stress and something that often tips people over the edge. So it looks like there are strategies that can be followed, though, at the moment. Like, it looks as though there may be possible for banks, for example, to defer loans, and I saw a lot in the media about that. So probably trying to relieve the immediate pressure for the next few months would be the strategy, and worry about in other words, put off the financial pressure until further down the track, when the main health crisis has actually passed, and then deal with that as a second challenge would be the way to go, if people can actually negotiate that. Now, businesses would be obviously in that situation too, deferring loans, getting more space to actually deal with the immediate situation. The government does seem to be motivated in terms of trying to keep the economy going as well as possible. And there's a tension between that and dealing with what you have to do to reduce the risks from the virus, but I think the government's right to try to keep the economy moving and as healthy as it possibly can be in this crisis, because that's a very big threat to people's health and survival and economic recession. So I think the financial side of it is very, very important to manage it in an expert way as best we can.
There's obvious physical distancing measures that are coming through, and we touched on it earlier. I was asked by our chapter in Dublin to make the recording of today available to them as well. So they're in a different situation again in terms of where they are in the crisis. And I know we take an island of Ireland approach. My mum and dad are up in the north, and they're in an enforced lockdown at the minute. They're retired and they get on very well, thankfully, and are used to being around the house together for periods of time. But there are a lot of other families who are coming together, and some people have said to me it's almost like a supercharged version of Christmas, where you bring people in an enforced proximity to each other who care for each other deeply, but just aren't used to being around each other. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic point. I think that's so true. I hadn't heard about the extended Christmas idea, but that's that's slightly horrifying, isn't it? But yeah, look, I think there's so many negative possible consequences of social isolation. On the one hand, you can't be with the people you might actually want to spend time with, and you might end up spending more time with family. Like, you can't choose your family, so, and obviously all families have their issues, so that could actually cause a lot of problems. That people have been worried about domestic violence even becoming more common because of the stress and the fear that's around, plus this kind of, cabin fever type, effect that you're referring to. So I think, look, that's another kind of additional source of stress that's going to build up, isn't it? And especially if this goes on for weeks and months, we can probably all cope with it over Christmas and for a couple of weeks even maybe. But if this is going to go on for months, then I think we're going to really sort of start to feel
it. You've had a busy morning with calls coming through from all arts and parts. Are we likely to see a more coordinated strategy from government around helping the community with mental health issues, particularly in this acute situation?
Well, just while we've been talking, Barry, in this webinar, you might have noticed I've just been texting as we're talking. I've been talking to the Minister for Health's office about measures, new measures that we're trying to put in place. So absolutely, I think the government is very tuned into this now, and we're going to see, I think, a more coordinated response, because, I think the viral epidemic is one massive health threat, but the threat to our mental health and well-being caused by a global disaster of this magnitude is going to be another big thing, and the government is realizing that, and I think they're talking to us. So it's kind of encouraging that something will get done, I think.
Oh, look, we hope that will be the case. I haven't seen any other questions coming in from the audience, but I did have a few that were sent through to me in advance. And you made a point in terms of your work in Origin about youth mental health and whatever. A lot of us as parents are wondering, how do we talk to the kids about what's happening, what's too much exposure, what's too little. Could you give us some advice in terms of how to bring those conversations through?
You still there, Barry?
Yes, I am. I was just wondering, talking to...
Froze a second there.
Hopefully we're still on.
Yeah.
In terms of talking to our kids as parents, I grew up in a fairly interesting period of the history of Ireland, and there were a lot of very horrible things were going on, and you tended to sort of have black and white responses where it was, turn the news off. It's, protect your children from it. In other cases, it was, well, look, it's going on. Let's just, have full view. I suspect things are more sophisticated now. Can you give any advice to parents in terms of how to talk to their kids about what's happening? And
yeah, well, you just gave a great example yourself. I think, just limiting the amount of negative news, so to say certain periods of the day. You don't have to be listening to the Twitter feed. You don't have to be following that for the whole day and watching News 24 all day on these topics. I think maybe try to catch up maybe in the morning and in the evening. So you're updated because it is moving fast, but you don't have to expose yourself to the anxiety, 24/7. That would be a good strategy for parents and kids. And I think probably the same thing. Try to get the kids to keep focusing on normal activities as much as they can with the sort of limitations, and keep structure in the day. Keep structure so that you get up at the usual time, you get dressed, you don't sit in the dressing gown all day and do nothing. You just try to build some structure and activity into the day, maintain physical exercise, try to sleep at the normal times, all that kind of stuff, and try to focus on some positive experiences as well. Because I think if we don't have positive experiences in our life, we all get depressed. So you need to have some positive things happening, and that could just be trying to do the things that you enjoy doing that you're still able to do, like reading a book or watching movies and whatever it is. So I think just a lot of that sounds pretty obvious, but and trying to balance the negativity in the news feed with some positive news as well.
Yeah, look, I had an interesting email from my son's school whenever the kids got sent home, and I thought it was a really good, well written email from one of the teachers. It was to the kids. It was telling them, watch all the movies you want to watch, play some video games, talk to your friends, get on your phones, talk to each other, do stuff. We'll be back in some sort of a learning environment in a few weeks, but give yourself time to sort of decompress. And I thought, geez, I wouldn't have got that when I was at school from a teacher. And I was just really encouraged by it.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Yeah, very good advice, I think, and probably good for all of us. We're all trying to keep things afloat and working in a different way. It's exhausting, isn't it? So for the people working, but the kids, maybe there's a bit of an upside for them at the moment.
Yeah, I think there might be a bit of extra screen time coming. We've had a really interesting question come through from the audience, Pat. As a young adult living in a share house, having limited face-to-face with your family during this time, what advice could you give the younger generation with regards to looking after our parents? As I'm sure, regardless of how stoic they may be, they're hurting also.
So what advice to give to the young adults in looking after their parents, was it?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose just if the young adults are out in the world and mixing, they might actually be at risk of carrying the virus, so they would have to just be careful how much exposure they would have for their parents and grandparents in that sense. So I suppose if they're going to visit them, social distancing would have to be followed, wouldn't it? You'd have to be careful about that, because you can't assume I think someone said yesterday, just assume that you're a carrier of the virus, even if you're not, and probably most of us are not, but you might be, so just think about the older people in relation to that. I guess most parents are not that old, but certainly grandparents, you would need to think about that. And I think the other myth that's starting to become a bit less what's the word? It's becoming more clear that it's a bit of a myth, is that this virus only kills old people. It can actually kill younger people too. So I think we can't just think that young people are sort of bulletproof or invulnerable to this. So that at the worst, they're going to be carriers and spreaders, potentially, but they themselves are going to be at risk too. So I think it's good advice to assume that we all may be, carrying the virus. So even if we're mixing with people, just to do the hand washing and the social distancing, you can still be sort of emotionally close to people, even if you're not touching them or close to them physically.
And just to follow on to that, it was not only physically helping out, but the emotional assistance to parents, I guess, sort of turning things on its head in terms of what we would have had as the accepted norm growing up, where, it was the parents who were caring for us. How do we talk to mum and dad about how they're feeling and give that support?
Yeah, yeah. The parents have to be strong, and but that's why I think my experience in developing mental health care for young people is very instructive. I mean, we went into that thinking we had all the answers. We just had to set up the programs for the young people, and they'd benefit. But actually, it didn't work, that way at all. The only way we could actually do helpful things for young people was by bringing them into the mix as partners and on an equal footing. And I think that's a great way to think about the young people, even teenagers. They've got a lot to contribute here.
Okay. I know you're super busy. I said we'd try and keep to half an hour. We're just coming up on that. I really appreciate you taking a bit of time. If you had, final point to give us a bit of direction on the days ahead, what would it be?
Well, I was just thinking, we are the Irish community, aren't we? And one of the great strengths of Irish people and Irish society is this kind of amazing emotional connection that we have. The emotionality and the sort of, I don't know, the depth of that and the connections that we all have, and what you've set up with the Chamber of Commerce is a great an example of that too. So I think that's one of the strengths we have. Probably a number of other cultures have that too, but we've definitely got that one over the English. So I think we ought to sort of build on that a bit and just weave that into the mix, and just remain connected. And I suppose we, as you alluded to in your own life, Irish people of all the cultures in the world, we are the ones that have been able to get through disasters and crises and tragedies more than almost anybody else. So I think we should have a lot of self-belief that we will get through this, and if we just do the usual things, sense of humor, music, art, culture, and actually that just belief in ourselves as a resilient group of people. So that's something that we probably ought to remember.
Professor Patrick McGorry, thank you very much for taking time to talk to the Chamber community, and we wish you all the best in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, same to you, Barry, same to everyone, and thanks. It's really great to hook up with everyone like this. Thanks so much for arranging it.
Thank you.